we're sort of getting up to the tragic climax, after which things sort of coast gently to a conclusion. Um, so where were we last time? We were looking at David's mistake, to put it mildly. Yeah, the mistake that keeps on mistaking, basically, right? That David raped a woman, murdered her husband, forced her to marry him, and in response, God said through the prophet, "The sword shall never depart from your house because of this." So conflict, right? So we have this conflict that erupts among David's children, his firstborn son Amnon, his daughter Tamar, and Tamar's brother Absalom. And Amnon decided to imitate his father by raping his sister, and Absalom decided to kill him for it. So, because David wouldn't do anything about it, remember that was his problem, that he was inert. And we'll see that tendency continue and finally come to a head at the end of tonight. Now, I have to warn everyone, we're going to have to end a few minutes early tonight because I have to be at a Zoom at exactly 8:30, which is about 10 minutes away. So probably about 8:20 we'll stop. My alarm will go off before that just to let me know, but it will be 8:20. Okay? So we left off with this, and Absalom murdered his brother in retribution, and then he ran off into exile, and eventually, with the help of David's second in command, he reconciled with his father. And that's where we ended. So it seems as though everything's now at least copacetic between father and son. But as we'll see, it doesn't turn out that way. Because just like Amnon, except in another way, Absalom is going to imitate dad, only in a bad way. Okay, so we're told that Absalom, now that he is back in his father's favor, he comports himself with chariots and horses and a whole sort of bevy of helpers, right? So this is clearly a show of favor. He wants to show that he is the favored son who will inevitably succeed his father. So he wants to start acting like king. Okay, so he does this, and it's not all show though. He actually decides to build relationships with the people. Um, and we have this one. Hey, welcome. We have this one episode or vignette where he stands at the front of the gate of his father's city and talks with everyone who comes through. It says if someone had a lawsuit to be decided by the king, Absalom would call this guy. And he says, he asks, who are you? And the guy says, I'm from someplace. And then he says, well, your case is good and just, but there's no one to hear you in the king's name. Isn't it terrible that we don't have a good justice system? If only I were judge, things would be better, right? I would render justice, he says. Now, how much of this is sincere and how much of it is just, politicking? That's up for the reader to decide because we're not told what he's thinking, only what he's saying. So he's setting himself up as, sort of the next godfather. And, everyone begins to show him homage, respect, and he gains popularity amongst the people. In fact, it says he was stealing the heart of Israel. Okay, so that's not necessarily a bad thing, so long as he's planning on behaving, but he's not. Right? So he is going to attempt to overthrow his father. And how would that be imitating David? Well, at least from an external perspective, David overthrew the king he was working for. Right? Maybe not, obviously, in his own narrative, he didn't intend to do it, right? But we don't know what Absalom has been told about his dad's history, and he seems to be imitating him again. Okay, so 4 years later, after he's cultivated a following, sort of a Facebook, set of fans, he says to Dad, "Let me go to Hebron to fulfill a vow that I made to God." And Hebron is the tribal capital, the tribal center of their tribe. It's where David first became king. So Absalom wanting to go there, that would be a good place to assert kingship, right? Of course, Dad doesn't think he's doing that, so he says, "Go on." When he gets there, on the way, he tells all of his agents. Notice he has agents now. Tells his agents to blow a horn, and when people hear that horn, to tell everyone that Absalom is king. So clearly now we realize he's going to try to usurp his father using his popularity. So, but he doesn't tell anyone about it. So he just brings all the people with him, and he's riding on a donkey in this painting because um, apparently this was a tradition that you would go to the place of your coronation on a donkey. I'm not sure what the symbolism of that is, but if you've ever heard of, later in the Gospels, Jesus enters Jerusalem on a donkey, that's basically echoing the House of David's coronation rites. Okay, he gets there, and he sends for this guy. He'll be kind of an important character because he's going to make a very bad decision later on. Ahithophel, someone who was his father's counselor, his consigliere, and he is he's on Absalom's side. So apparently, even some of David's right hand men are now kind of conniving with Absalom. Okay, so things are getting serious. Finally, David is informed about what's going on. The Israelites have given their hearts to Absalom, and they are following him. Now, if you were king and you realize that there is a attempt to overthrow you, and you're in the capital with all your army and all that, what would you do if you heard there's a rebellion brewing and coming our way? You would crush it, or maybe at least you would, prepare the defenses of the city. But what does David do? He says, "Run away!" Here he goes. Where he is? Why is it getting this? There he goes. Okay. His first response is not "let's defend ourselves." It says, "Get up, let's flee, or none of us will escape Absalom. Leave at once, or he'll quickly overtake us and then bring disaster upon us and put the city to the sword." Well, I guess he would only do that if you let him into the city. Okay, so this is a very odd behavior on David's part. We need to interpret this. Um, in fact, this is sort of an interesting part of his story because most of it is a build-up to one battle, which takes all of one verse to describe, in which he wins. But his first inclination is to back off. So yes, he's been told the people are with Absalom, but you've got the strongest city in the country and you have an army too. Why would you simply abandon it all? What do we make of this? This is not the David we're familiar with, is it? Of course, David last week wasn't the David we were familiar with either, right? So things are strange now. Any idea of what he could be doing? Let's run away. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to consider yourself circumstance, I think.
Okay.
If that was like my nephew or my brother, I wouldn't want to kill him directly. That wouldn't be something I'd want to do.
This is a really interesting thought.
He's waiting for something to happen that he can deal with, not that. That's another issue in that.
Yeah.
That's one thing.
So that's actually probably close to what's actually happening here. As we'll go, we'll see evidence of that. First of all, David's not just running away, he is withdrawing, which is in itself a very reprehensible thing for a king to do, very much in keeping with his active, response to various problems. But he says, whatever the Lord, they say, whatever you want to do, okay. So his counselors don't challenge him on this. But yeah, apparently he doesn't want to fight Absalom because Absalom is his son, one of his many, obviously. But apparently he doesn't want to kill him. So he's going to try to do everything he can to avoid battle. So he heads off with his whole household, except for 10 concubines whom he left behind to care for the palace. Okay, now this is the strange part because, okay, concubines, unless they're like ninja concubines, they're not like warriors. So they're just like, custodians of the palace. He's leaving them undefended against a usurper. That's a problem. Why did he take everyone else except for them? Who knows? Okay, he brings his army with him. They march past him. And he runs into this guy. Well, in this episode, we see a lot of sort of new characters appear. They're kind of David's friends. Many of them we haven't heard of before. It's very likely that this part of the narrative was largely remembered as who helped me when I was in trouble. So even if we haven't heard of them before, these are people, locals who actually didn't go with Absalom and chose back the right horse in the end. Okay, so there's this one guy named Ittai, who is the commander of David's mercenaries, his foreign mercenaries, and he says, you don't have to come with us. You're a foreigner, you're in exile. Why come with me? I'm being attacked by my son. You've only been working for me for a short time. Go on, bless God bless you. Go have a good life somewhere. And he says, no, 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 I'm not going to leave you, whether for death or life. So he demonstrates his uncommon loyalty. He says, all right, let's go. Okay, and notice he brings his whole family with him. Um, Everyone else is weeping. I guess everyone else who likes David is weeping because of this, as David marches on to away from his capital. The next group he talks with are the priests who have their box. And remember, he has two of them, this guy named Sadok and then Abiathar. And he has a conversation with them. He says, take the ark back to the city. That's interesting. So that's the war chest, literally. It's what you need to win battles. He says, take it back to the city. He says, if I find favor with the Lord, he will bring me back and permit me to see it again. But if he's not pleased with me, I'm ready, I guess, ready to die, I suppose. So it's almost as though he's sort of handing things over to divine destiny or something like that. It's not the first time that he would have taken that tactic, except the last time he did this, he was an outlaw, right? He wasn't responsible for a whole kingdom, and now he's responsible, and he's sort of leaving it up to hoping God will do something about it. And he says, "Okay, also I have a plan. You have some sons. I want you to use your sons as informers to let me know. You send message to them, they'll so I know what's going on." So again, he's not totally just running away. He wants to know what's happening so he can mount a proper response. Okay, so they do that. They continue to weep and walk barefoot. And then he is told Ahithophel, who is like his counselor, is on the enemy side. And so he says, "Oh Yahweh, turn the counsel of Ahithophel to folly." We'll see whether that happens in the story. Then a good counselor comes by, this guy named Hushai, and he's sad because David's running away. And he says, if you come with me, you'll be a burden to me. But if you return to the city, like the priests did, tell Absalom, let me be your servant. I was formerly your father's servant, but now I will be yours. And by this he will thwart for me the counsel of Ahithophel, my bad counselor. So clearly he's setting something up here. He's going to try to trip up the opposition covertly with these sort of fifth columnists inside the walls. He says, and he tells them about the priests. They're my go-betweens. You can talk to them. They'll talk to me. We'll communicate this way. All right. So Hushai goes back as Absalom is arriving. He's going to try to insinuate himself into the new king's court. Another guy shows up. Well, we've met this guy before, Ziba. He is one of Saul's, the previous king's servants, and David allowed him to become basically the caretaker of one of Jonathan's children. Right? Remember, Jonathan was David's buddy, and Jonathan said, "When you become king, please don't harm any of my family." He says, "Okay, I won't." And so he has Ziba take care of Jonathan, or not Jonathan's son, whose name is Meribal. He says, "So why have you come here?" He brought all this stuff. Why are you bringing all this stuff from the city? He says, "Well, this is for the king's household, and you're the king. And I brought all this food because you're running away, and you might need some food in the wilderness." And David asks, "Well, isn't this belong to Jonathan's son? Where is he?" And then we learn he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, "Today the house of Israel will restore to me my father's kingdom." Okay, now we find out that Mary Baal is actually hoping that he's going to be able to take the kingship now that David is out. So he's betrayed David, basically. And so he says, "Okay, I'm going to give you all his property." And so Mary Baal is now out. Ziba is in. So David he's discovering who his true friends are, right? Who his true friends and enemies are. Okay, they continue. This is an enemy. You can tell he's throwing rocks. So This guy, we haven't heard of him before, but he's a member of the house of Saul. He's part of Saul's clan. His name is Shimei. And he says he keeps cursing David and throwing stones at him. I imagine, the Frenchman from Monty Python, the Holy Grail, who taunt Arthur and his knights. This is sort of Shimei. He's taunting them. And this is his taunt. He says, get out, you man of blood, you scoundrel. The Lord has paid you back for all the blood shed from the family of Saul, whom you replaced as king, and the Lord has handed over the kingdom to your son Absalom. And now look at you. You suffer ruin because you are a man of blood. That's an idiom meaning you're a violent man. You've harmed other people, which is not untrue, is it? Right? So you have two different narratives, right? You have the narrative that what's happening to you is a punishment from God, and you should just grin and bear it. And then David is saying, "Well, I don't know if it is. Let's find out. I'm gonna see what happens if I just sort of step back." This guy keeps heckling them, though. David's commander says, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go take his head." And he says, "No, no, let's not. Let's just let him keep cursing. Maybe God told him to curse me. So why should we oppose him?" So he says, "I will taunt you a second time. If my own son, who came forth from my loins, is seeking my life, how much more does this guy have a right to curse me?" That seems a bit dejection, right? You imagine he must be having some emotional trauma at this point because his own son, who he forgave or at least reconciled with, is now trying to kill him. So he's saying, let him do his worst. Do your worst. But he says, perhaps the Lord will look upon my affliction and repay me with good for the curses that this guy is uttering on us. So he seems to be just grappling with various ways of interpreting his experience here. The guy keeps throwing rocks. Okay, finally they get to a place where they rest. Meanwhile, Absalom arrives in Jerusalem with the evil betrayer counselor Ahithophel. And we're told, an aside, that this guy was like the greatest counselor on earth. Everyone thought he was like the voice of God. That's how wise he was. Everyone loved him. Okay, so but now we get to see whether God turns his counsel to folly or not, as David hoped. So, on his way to his palace, David's friend, the other guy, Hushai, uh, declares his loyalty to the new king. Long live the king. At first, Absalom's a bit doubtful. Where I thought you were my father's friend. Why aren't you with him? And he says, no, no, no. I am his whom the Lord and all this people of Israel have chosen. So whoever's king, I will be a friend to, basically. Just as I was in attendance on your father, I'll serve you too. Right? That's at least his claim. We know that, of course, that smile is not quite genuine. That David is saying, "I want you to somehow thwart what's going on here." So, if you will, David is sort of attempting to crush this rebellion from within, perhaps through his friends. Um, Meanwhile, Absalom asks the treacherous counselor, "What do you think I should do?" And here's his bad advice: go to your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. When all Israel hears how odious you've made yourself to your father, all those on your side will take courage. In other words, if you rape all of your father's concubines in public, they will all know that it's a choice between you or David, and you're the one in power now, so no one will dare oppose you. That's kind of the logic here. Um, I'm not sure if the logic works, but this again is sort of the problem with David leaving the concubines behind without anybody to guard them against this guy. So he's going to be like Amnon times 10 here. Well, yeah, because there's 10 concubines. And so we have this wonderfully Baroque painting of Absalom raping the concubines. And so he's sort of turned into this maniacal guy. And so, again, remember, that's what God said would happen. It said, I'll take your wives and give them to someone else. But when God said he was an accessory to rape, we actually look at how this is coming about. It's not that God is forcing him to do this, is God, right? God is not actually in the picture at all right now. It's the bad counselor. And apparently it's the counselor and Absalom's sense of what kings should do in order to gain power. Okay, this is what we call dual causality. God says things will happen for a reason, but it's really human actions that cause them. Okay, then uh, he asks him, okay, well, what else should I do? He says, well, the evil counselor Ahithophel says, let me take 12,000 men and go get David, your father. I'll come upon him because he's weary and discouraged. I'll cause him to panic. We'll destroy all of them. And it says the plan sounded good. But Absalom has another counselor now, right? This is the good guy, Hushai, who says he's loyal to Absalom, but really is loyal to David. He says, let's see what Hushai has to say. Let's see whose counsel is best here. And so he says, well, should we follow this first plan? If not, tell me yours. So Hushai gives his plan. His plan is not to chase David down, because he says, these are skilled guerrilla warriors, right? They're like Rambo. They'll take you out if you do this. It's dangerous. Even now, he lies hidden in some cave, right? After all, David and his merry men kept alive from Saul for many years. He's a veteran at this. And if some of our soldiers should fall in the first attack, people will say, your followers have been slaughtered, and then even the brave man with the heart of a lion will melt, right? So don't risk an open confrontation with your father because he's still pretty formidable. Of course, he doesn't look very formidable right now. He's been running away, but maybe that was all part of the plot to kind of like when you're boxing, it's like you feint, try to draw the enemy in, and so you can knock them out maybe. Anyway, that's his counsel. And he says, so let's all get together and you go with us, everyone together in a giant army, and let's sort of scour the land, find out where they are, first of all, and then we'll sort of corner him, kind of like Saul did eventually. He says, oh, I like your counsel better. Okay, and then we're told, again, dual causality, Yahweh had commanded that Ahithophel's good counsel should be thwarted so that he might bring Absalom to ruin. So this is all apparently a divine plot as well as a human plot to lure uh, Kiddo out into the open here. So now that the plan has been struck, David's friend Hushai is going to tell the priests, are going to tell their sons, are going to tell David what's going on. So he says, go tell them. And so here are the sons of the priests hanging out at a well, and they hear what's going on, but before they can do anything about it, we're told that an attendant saw them and informed Absalom. So they've been found, and so they have to hide in a cistern. And says they hid in a well, and then a woman came and covered the mouth of the cistern so that it looked like it was full, like there's no one hiding there. Famous last words. Okay, so the bad guys, minions, come and they ask her, where are these people? And she says, oh, they went away and they couldn't find them, so they returned. Okay, so she's able to get them out of danger. And then they're able to go tell David, watch out, your son's coming for you to this particular location. They'll be here tomorrow, basically. So leave the location you're at and find a defensible place. So he does. He crosses the river, finds another place, and meanwhile, Ahithophel, the bad counselor, when he realized that his advice was spurned, decided to commit suicide. Um, Maybe he was taking his job too seriously. I mean, yeah, you're shamed in the court of the king, but that seems a bit an extreme response, perhaps. Maybe this is a dual causality, and God's sort of tripping him up, giving him his just deserts. But anyway, he dies. He's out of the picture. David, meanwhile, sets up on one side, the son sets up his army on the other, and they get ready for a battle. Absalom appoints a new commander in chief, some guy named Amasa. And David there's some more friends of David who show up with more provisions to feed the troops while they are waiting there. So that's very nice. And notice how carefully listed everything people who did for David when he was in danger. And so David musters his troops. He puts his loyalists in charge. And he says, I'm going to go out and fight with you, like I used to, right? But they say, no, 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 it's too dangerous. No one will care if we run away, but if you run away, then everyone's going to follow Absalom. So you stay here and we'll go fight. And David says, okay, whatever you want to do. So, as before, he watches them leave. But before they leave, he takes the three commanders and he says, be gentle to my young Absalom for my sake. Okay, so here, and we're told the soldiers hear this too. He says, so defeat the enemy, but don't kill my son. Right? Okay, so what's the plan here? He seems to be, pretty canny about how he's setting things up. But how do you think the soldiers will feel about him wanting to spare the man who's threatened them all? I mean, he already was an outlaw to the king's justice, and the king brought him back. Hopefully, he would behave better, and he didn't behave better. Wasn't this the same problem that he had with Saul? Right? Saul said, "I will be good from now on," and then he wasn't. This is sort of a recurring theme in these stories is that it seems that things are resolved and they're not. So how would the folks who are actually having to fight this battle think about those orders? Yeah.
This kind of relates to what you said earlier about David saying, let them curse me, maybe the Lord. That shocked.
Hmm.
I was like, because
He claims not to know whether God favors him or not anymore, right?
it's passive, like
Yeah.
it's trying to kill him, but it's songs. But also, like, let people curse me. And that makes me first, and he says, maybe the Lord wants them to, would God tell others to curse someone else? Is one question. The question is, aren't we supposed to protect ourselves? Like, you
You
can
think.
protection spells
You think.
to protect against. We are, but extrapolating from this, should we protect ourselves?
That's a really good question. And I think that's exactly the sort of question that's raised by this story. I mean, it's really all the way back to Bathsheba, where he doesn't act like a king and doesn't protect others, and now he's not protecting himself. Um, Now, if we went back to that primal scene where God said, how dare you do this? I'm going to make bad things happen to you. Um, is it possible that's part of David's passivity, or at least his unwillingness to act as king? Is that the kind of fatalism maybe that he's acquired over the years? Maybe he heard God say, "Okay, I'm going to cause all this trouble in your household." Is his response to say, "Okay, well, God's going to make it happen, and I can't do anything about it. I don't need to make any choices anymore because it's already been determined. So when my daughter is raped, I won't punish her rapist. When my son is murdered, I won't punish his murderer. This is all just God dictating things." That's kind of a twisted theology, actually. Yeah. So just like a lot of presentations of God, a lot of the ambiguity is how people interpret it, right? And so there's various ways we can interpret what David's doing here, but I think you're absolutely right that this raises questions about is he really distorting things?
What do people, well, people who believe the whole Bible is connected, some people
Sure.
or could comment on the armor of God,
Right.
protecting ourselves, like we should, it's like a direct contradiction of that, protecting yourself.
Well, and there's plenty of stories in the Bible where it's kind of a spectrum. There are some stories where, like, they're crossing the Red Sea. Moses says, you don't need to do anything, just let God do it. And then there's other places where he says, you have to fight, you have to defend yourselves. Right? God will help. You have to defend yourselves. There's a famous Arabic proverb that says, trust in God, but tie up your camel. Get it? Yeah, so yes, the universe might be on your side, but you are expected to make an effort still. Or the other famous one is, the God promised someone that you'll win the lottery, and he doesn't win the lottery. He says, "Why didn't I win the lottery?" He said, God asked, "Did you buy a ticket?" So it's the whole question of human agency and divine agency cooperating or not. And you see a whole spectrum of that in the Bible. And that's in a sense what David is trying to figure out is, where is the line here where he's just waiting be saved versus actually saving himself and his people. Yeah,
David knows when he's getting an order to do,
right.
but he has no clue when God doesn't give him an order.
Well, that's a good point too. He doesn't have access to the divination device because that's in Jerusalem, right? So what do you do when you don't have your priest with you to divine, to check the oracles and all that? Uh, I think this story, in addition to, presumably being a pro-David narrative that explains who helped me when I was down, it also, in a very artful way, it raises these very human questions about, how do we know, what is enough knowledge to go on before we make a decision about what we do, protecting ourselves, protecting others. David's talking, but we don't know what's going on in here, right? Let's continue here. Okay, so don't kill him, basically. Be gentle. Okay, so we're not told what the soldiers think about this. They're not really smiling, are they? Okay, so here's the one line. They have a battle and they win. And the Absalom side loses and they all run away into this forest. And while they're in the forest, Absalom is surprised by some of David's men, and he happens to be on a mule. I don't know what he was doing with a mule in battle, like a battle mule, battle donkey. So he rides off into the forest, and then there's the mule, and there's him. Guess what? He gets caught by his hair, right? Because remember, there was that scene last year where he has really long hair. And so this is the problem of having long hair when you're going through a thick forest. So he gets caught between heaven and earth, it says, while the mule kept going under him. So he's like, he's caught on a branch. And Joab, David's general, says, I'm not going to waste my time with this kid. And he kills him. He skewers him for target practice while still alive. Yikes. Okay, so obviously he didn't listen to David. The enemy leader is dead, however. Meanwhile, they bring news to David. And David's response to the death of, well, he said, we won the battle, but you lost your son. So we're told he mourns, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, my son, if I had died instead of you. Okay, so I think we could understand that. Anyone who has a child has deep feelings for their child. After all, they came from them, right? So obviously, even if the guy did bad things, David's still going to mourn the fact that he's dead. But when Joab, the guy who skewered his son, comes back, he says, you're making a scene. You're putting this, you are putting things in the wrong perspective, especially in terms of the optics that people are watching you right now. People who have bled for you, who could have gone over to the other side, but chose to stay with you. So here's Joab becomes sort of like the conscience here. Here's what he says. He says, though they saved your life and your sons and daughters' lives, because he has plenty of other sons and daughters, and the lives of your wives and your raped concubines, you have put all your servants to shame today by loving those who hate you and hating those who love you. For you have announced today that officers and servants are nothing to you. Indeed, I, Joab, am certain that if Absalom were alive today and all of us dead, it would be fine for you. He's really laying it on him right here. So get up, go and speak kindly to your servants. Swear by the Lord that I swear that if you don't go out, not a single man will remain with you overnight. So you're going to lose your kingdom over this. Okay, so in the end, David listens to this advice. Probably, not very willingly, but he says, yeah, you're kind of right. And this is sort of the culmination of this whole thing we've been seeing from once he makes that big mistake and tries to cover it up, then he doesn't want to take action when other people do similar things, right? His sons imitate him and he refuses to stop them. And so he gets himself into this situation. So he has indeed sort of become the opposite of what he was in the past. Right? This is not the David of, the outlaw days. It's not the David even of the first parts of his kingship days. So how did this change happen? I mean, yeah, he made a mistake, but we don't have to be defined by our mistakes, do we? So now we get to sort of think for a moment, the moments we have left. Uh, how do we explain this change in his character, or at least this vacillation, this inconsistency in his character? This is the guy who killed Goliath. This was the boy hero and the great pious guy, and now he's this is Rembrandt's rendition of it, by the way. He's just sort of this guy who has lost the will to act when he needs to act. And it does raise the question of what should he have done? And we don't have a narrator that tells us what he should have done. Yeah.
I was thinking earlier, he really didn't have a full model except for, slaying Goliath. He didn't have any teaching. He had no, and I was thinking biblically, it said the father gives the son to governors and teachers
Right.
to train him. He didn't have any training because he was too busy building his kingdom to train
Yeah.
his own kids at all. He didn't have time.
Okay. So
It wasn't important.
that's possible. And we also have to think sort of intergenerationally here. Now, of course, David, everyone's experience is different, right? He had all that experience of having nothing, right, and gaining all this through his choices. But his sons, they grew up as the sons of the king. They grew up in a palace. They don't have the same worldview as him, right? And the son that will succeed him, Solomon, will be even more so. They grow up in a world of entitlement, basically, right? Where they think they can do everything that they want. And apparently he's too busy chasing other men's wives to actually pay attention to his children. And now he reaps the effects of it. Now, he's not a villain, is he? I mean, he's still kind of a hero at the end. He does, keep the kingdom together. There'll be challenges after this too. But so it could have been that maybe it was the busyness of kingship that allowed him to fail in these other aspects. Are there other ways we could think about this? I mean, that's one interpretation. What are some others?
Did David feel guilty because he allowed Amnon to rape his head?
We didn't allow it. He chose not to punish him. Yes, he didn't respond when he could have.
The person that responded to that was Absalom, and David's thinking, well, Absalom was kind of justified.
So he forgives. At least he embraces him again, but in the hopes maybe that Absalom would take the straight and narrow. But instead, Absalom just uses the experience of I could do whatever I want now. So yeah, we also have to think about that particular chain of events that could have affected the way that David thinks. What else?
I think it goes back to how his relationship with um Saul.
Ah,
Because to grow up and have like this mentor who you look up to, and then I mean it's really gonna mess with you when they start trying to kill you throughout like your life.
yes.
And I think about like a specific event where he and his group, they were like these outlaws and they went to that house and they abandoned,
Right.
we didn't kill you when we
We didn't take any of your stuff, so you give it anyway.
it's already like becoming corrupted then.
Okay.
It's like sense of entitlement and the sense of like, well, if I need something, I just gotta take it.
I'm the good guy. You should do what I say, right?
Like, I feel like he's been like that for a really
Okay. And that's another part. Maybe, that maybe the one purpose of that story is to put in our minds, maybe there is something flawed about him that's going to continue with him and may manifest itself again at some point, except now he's in charge. And so when we go all the way back to the book of Judges, remember at the end of Judges says there was no king in the land, everyone did whatever they wanted. Well, now we see that David is basically an anarchy of one. He does whatever he wants, or his children do whatever they wanted. And so is monarchy any better than anarchy here? Well, fortunately, there are people like Joab who said, well, hang on, you can't let this keep going like this. You got to behave like a king. Yeah, what else?
Back to what I said earlier.
Yeah.
Maybe the Lord would curse. Is there other places in the Bible where the Lord actually does curse people?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I would have to look them all up. Usually he curses something around someone, like he curses the soil because of Cain. He didn't curse Cain directly. Um, but he says, yeah, whoever blesses you will be blessed, and whoever curses you will be cursed. But, that's in the passive, it's not actively saying, I'm going to curse you. So, yeah, I think understanding what a curse is. A curse is not just wishing ill upon someone. It's actually, you're trying to activate the forces of the universe to actually target that person. You're asking for, the structures of reality to turn against that person as though they're manipulable.
Question, because come out of paganism where it's a huge debate, is curses a good thing or a bad thing?
Hmm.
Like say curse.
Right. It's the yeah. Yeah, so I would have to take a look and see exactly where that might happen. But no, I was thinking about that too. This is the law of the double return, right? Here, basically, what's going on in here, that what David did, is now coming back at him, right, in various ways. Um, so anyway, so this is sort of probably his lowest point, right, as king. And of course, the other problem is, of course, is that he is unable to separate his understandable feelings for his family members from the need to execute justice within the world, right? As a leader, right? We have that experience too, where people, use power in order to help their own, right? Yeah,
Perhaps these stories and the theological reception of these stories can help us ask questions about what it means to be an ethical leader,
sure.
uh, not just at a geopolitical or even a civil level, but at a human level. What makes us as individuals ethical leaders?
And David's one of the best people for doing that with, because he's not a one-dimensional character, right? He has good characteristics and bad characteristics, good days and bad days. Most characters in the Bible are one-dimensional. They represent a virtue or a vice. But he's the most detailed character in the Bible, next to Moses, at least in the Old Testament. So yeah,
The one in your family that gave you the guidance, your mom or your dad, the most.
mom,
Me too.
but dad too eventually when I got older.
Yeah.
Probably we all have different stories about that, but yeah, the idea of who is the model at any particular point. And I like the point of bringing up the experience of Saul, because in a sense, David experiences victimhood from Saul, and yet he ends up using the same tactics to deal with his own problems. So again, imitation, right? Okay, well, anyway, we're going to continue next week. We'll finish off David and we'll get into Solomon, who's supposed to be the wisest person on earth. Kind of doubt that a bit in some ways, but we'll look at that. We'll look at the tradition of wisdom, right? And we'll actually look at some of the later texts attributed to Solomon, where the author taking on the role of Solomon examines the concept of Lady Wisdom, right? Of this sort of feminine divine that permeates the world. And so we'll take kind of this historical story of Solomon from Second Samuel, First Kings, and then we'll look into some of the wisdom literature attributed to him, like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Book of Wisdom, that kind of stuff. So we'll kind of vary things a bit. Okay, thank you very much for ending early tonight. I promise we'll do as long as you want next time. Take care. All right.